Hey, welcome to Inspirational Focus, and we are joined again by Pastor Jeremy Holingshead of the Lutheran Church. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I guess today we're going to talk about missions.
Yes, world missions in the history of the church, and then maybe in the 21st century as well. When you start out with basically 12 main followers, like Jesus with the apostles there, your movement is going to expand or it's going to die, right? And so we know that the church expanded. We know that the following of Christ went into other groups. It started out as almost just a radical sect of the Hebrew faith. And so then what happens is over time, people from other groups, other countries, all kinds of other places come to be part of Christianity as kind of we know it today. And so how did that spread? What was successful? What were really good things that were done in the early church? And how and why did so many people convert and come to believe this? Because it was brand new, right? You had Romans converting. They had traditionally been pagan, where they had a pantheon of gods and worshipped several different ones. You had people in Greece with a very similar pantheon. And you had people who were Hebrew, who were Jewish, as we would think about people today, also joined this sect. And so what was going on and what led people to continue to believe, and then what then was the impetus to send missionaries into other places?
Now, has the maybe the mission of missionaries or missions, has that changed over time? Rather, or do some of them just go to purely help people, or is the end product to gain followers as a byproduct, or is, maybe in the old days, missionaries, we went to get new followers? Well,
really in the earliest days, because of how the church worked, you read in the book of Acts, they shared all things in common. People sold property so that people who had nothing or were struggling no longer had to struggle. So the gospel changed people's lives that it made others around them curious, and it also always helped other folks around them. So some of the mandates that Jesus gave humanity were to feed the hungry, heal the sick, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless. He specifically tells us to do those things, visit the prisoner. So these are all commandments of Christ. And so, in a way, you can't really fully share the gospel if you're not doing all the things Jesus said. So in following Jesus, that means you do feed the hungry and heal the sick and all these other things. Christianity, very early on, suffered persecution, right? Jesus himself was crucified, we know that. And it didn't take long until this movement started to get more and more followers and more people started to follow it, that they figured out this wasn't part of Judaism, who kind of got a sort of leeway from the Roman officials. And so since it was no longer considered Hebrew, they were then persecuted by Rome. The first persecution that was widespread and systematic came under Nero. And at the same time, there's a plague outbreak in Rome. Christians are being killed, and they're kind of blamed for the plague outbreak, which was not true, but happened. Nero's having Christians burnt on top of pikes, and it's kind of a terrible thing.
So were they not accepted because everybody in the Roman society should believe in the Roman gods?
You absolutely have to revere Caesar, right, in Rome.
Okay,
and
so
Caesar,
it's not Caesar.
Well, Caesar is accorded as a godship.
Okay.
So, like, when we think about Constantine, who later, is baptized on his deathbed, and we think of him as a Christian now, he was the only person in the history of the world that was, upon his death, he was simultaneously, sainted in the Christian church and deified as a pagan god. So he's an interesting guy.
Okay.
People like to blame him for things in Christianity now, which may be not super fair. But
what kind of pagan religion was he with?
So Constantine, like all Roman gods, had the Roman pantheon. He wasn't an Olympian, but Caesar is, revered as God.
Was he an equal to Caesar?
Who?
Constantine.
Constantine was Caesar. He was the Caesar at the time.
Okay, so Caesar is a
title
and
of,
not
of the
person.
emperor of Rome, and at various points there are 4 of them at once,
We're not
one
talking
has
about
more.
Caesar, the guy who got stabbed.
No, that's Julius Caesar. But because of him, and because he was emperor, all the other leaders in Rome who were the top guy was called Caesar, or they might, an Augustus. So there, at one point there were 2 Caesars and 2 Augusti. So you were an Augustus or you were a Caesar, and you were all 4 co-leaders of Rome, like that kind of thing.
Okay.
So, but you had to give reverence to Caesar as a Roman citizen, or one who was under Roman occupation.
Or like on some shows, bend the knee.
Exactly.
And if you didn't bend the knee,
and if you would not pay reverence to Caesar, like you wouldn't burn incense in his honor, then you actually were considered a heretic because you didn't properly worship God.
Okay.
And so the Christians will not, because they're monotheist. They believe there's one God. Okay. And
we to bow to no one but Jesus.
Exactly. Exactly. And Jesus as earthly representative of the Trinity, and as the Son of God, he if you reverence Christ, you cannot then pay reverence to Caesar. And a lot of our famous folks, like the Apostle Paul, he's a Roman citizen, likely because his father was a Roman citizen. All right, but we know he's a Jew of the Sanhedrin. He's a really important religious figure. Eventually, he is killed, probably for the same thing many of the Christians were in the early days, and that is because he would not pay reverence to Caesar. But because he's a Roman citizen, unlike most of the Christians, he gets certain special treatment. He gets taken all over the empire until someone finally has the guts to kill him. And so that's why he ends up getting to preach to governors and all these different kinds of things. So we're under this persecution, although Christ has told us in Matthew 28, the Great Commission, go ye therefore into all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So you have a Christian mandate to spread the gospel through the whole world. And we know from Christ that that's not just something you do by talking. You do it by showing kindness and care. And so even though the Christians are being persecuted under Nero, even though under threat of death, if they find out you're Christian, you're going to be killed, the Christians stay behind and care for those who have been afflicted by the plague. So even though it may mean their own death, they're the ones who are providing medical care.
Is this the same plague, the Black Plague?
No, I don't think it's the same.
One.
It's different. It's not bubonic, which is in Europe many years later. But
we're talking in the 100 years.
Yeah, this is
500s.
Earlier than that. It's in the first couple hundred years of Christianity. So,
okay.
So
this is when the original apostles were still around and dying off at that point.
They probably were already killed by the time the persecution under Nero begins.
Right.
But it's not too far from them.
Right.
So again, it's already spread, and it's already in Rome, and there are lots of Christians there. And even though they're being killed, and even though their ministry may get them killed, they go and they do it, right? Because it's what's right. It's what's Christian. It's what they believe. And so for me, this is almost the first action that's really of a missionary movement. Now, before then, you'd see Christians, after this time, you see Christians killed in gladiatorial games, killed by lions, like in the movies, like in Ben-Hur and stuff like that.
They make good targets, right?
Yeah, apparently. Well, they don't fight back, and you can kill them.
Oh, yeah.
There's lots of blood, and they are bad citizens because they don't reverence Caesar. So there's all these different kind of
worthless.
things. Well, if I'm a Roman governor, all they do is cause me trouble.
Right.
Until this moment, right? So they're caring for those. And so people would say the blood of the martyrs spreads the gospel, because why are all these people willing to die? It makes people curious.
Right.
Okay, and so then
whatever must be very important to them.
Right. Why on earth are all these people who, if they stay to help me, will be killed because then they'll know they're Christians? Why are they staying to help me? And so that made people very curious. And this, for me, is the very first missionary movement, because they really have spread all over. Because of the Great Commission, they tell other people about Jesus, whatever. But this is different. This is not just, I won't reverence Caesar, so I'm a martyr. This is, I'm doing something that may 100% get me found out and killed, but I'm going to do it anyway because I care about you. And not just your eternal salvation, but your life here. And so this is a very important missionary thing, and it does happen where people are, but it also happens a long way from Israel. Now, if we can see the map that shows some missionary movements today, we're going to take a look and talk about how maybe what happens now is a little different than what was happening in Rome under the persecution under Nero. So as you see on there, there are a lot of arrows going back and forth from the United States, right? And so we send a lot of missionaries, and we receive some missionaries and some things from other places, but this is, from a certain denomination, and it shows like how everybody sends to and shares with everybody else. And that idea is really good, but we can see that more arrows come from the United States than anywhere else, and they also go back. Now, that's good, and it could point to us being leaders in missionary movements, but it also shows where all the goods are being purchased and from where all the goods are being sent. And so missionary movements changed over time and became centralized as institutions became centralized. And so what we have there with that map that we looked at a few seconds ago and what's going on in the world today is it really kind of looks like one nation benefits a whole lot more from the missionary movements than even the places where the goods are being sent. So our economy is bolstered much by us sending goods overseas. Also, our shipping, we're sending these goods to all those countries in the world. And so what we have going on is, who are we helping the most with our missionary efforts? Are we really helping the countries where we send them the most, or are we fostering dependency? Are we stabilizing economies and helping with hunger, or are we creating hunger problems and destabilizing economies? And so that's what we have to think about in the 21st century as we think about missions and how we do them.
Or do they just put up with whatever, you're preaching to get the goods?
Well, that might be a case, but I think as in Rome in the earliest day, I'm sure they didn't care one bit who was helping them. They were dying.
Right.
And so now when people are starving, they don't care where food is coming from, I'm sure, but
maybe
you want to find out, why are you doing this? Why are you helping me? I mean, it's like, it used to be maybe more commonplace to stop and help someone on the side of the road. With cell phones, maybe not so much.
Right.
But if someone stopped to help you today, change your tire, you might be like, why are you helping me? And so it's one of those questions of people are going to ask, why are you helping me? And then you can talk about Jesus. And sometimes maybe you preach the gospel first and hand out goods later. It all depends on how your church does it. But what we have to think about, so there's one pretty famous, and I'm not going to name names or say anything like this, where they try to make sure every child on the planet gets a Christmas present. Okay, and so all the goods for those are bought in America, or not in America, but other countries that do it. So you buy it in your country, and then you ship it overseas. And so all of that shipping and all of that purchasing stimulates our economy and our tax base. But it doesn't necessarily do likewise for the places where those presents go. And so how much money is spent on the fuel to send the presents overseas, and how much good could be done in those countries to develop infrastructure and farming and all these other kind of things. Like,
so
do I want my child to have a Christmas present or clean water? I'm going to choose clean water, right? Because then my kids don't get cholera.
Right. There's a lot of places where they just need toilets.
Anything. I mean, anything that develops infrastructure to provide for better public health, and for kids to be able to go to school, this is how we can change the world in the 21st century. And so maybe we have to think about, when Jesus tells us to feed the hungry, heal the sick, is there a better way than just sending our people, or sending our goods? Could we then rather train people in country to do those things, providing jobs and stimulating economic growth? And would that be better in the long run? So if your choice is would
that mean bringing people here to train them, send them back?
Or you take training there, however you end up doing it. So, and that's what we have to think about. Now, that's
do all
traditionally
churches do this?
No, not all churches do missions that way. And if your choice is one between sending our goods somewhere or whatever else and doing nothing, I mean, I highly recommend that we do something, right? And so if this is all we know how to do, then we're not doing anything wrong. But just the question I have for today and for human beings everywhere is there a better way? So in the history of the church, can we get the picture of Lars Lestadius? There's this guy, Lars Levi Lestadius, and he's from Sweden. And what's different about him is he's half Sami. So he's half native Laplander, right? And so this is people who are ravaged by alcoholism and all kinds of other problems. And so what we have with Lars is, because he's from this culture, when he becomes a pastor in Lapland, he knows their story. He's of the people. Mm-hmm. And what happens is this great revival movement that doesn't just occur in Sweden and Lapland, but it spreads all over the world. There are churches started in America that were part of that Lestadian revival. And so what he shows us, and he lived from 1800 to 1861, so even in that time period, what he was able to do, because he was half Laplander, his father was not Laplander and his mother was, he knows the plight of the people, he knows what they need most, because he is the people. And so alcoholism was what was most broken in Laplander society at the time. And when he became a pastor, he had a strong stance against alcoholism and was part of a pietistic movement, which is where you engage the heart for the sake of the gospel. And to show your engagement of heart, you wouldn't drink, because that was what was destroying your society and what was making people grow up in poverty and, you know, their kids to have horrible lives. And so he confronted what was most broken in society. The problem was then, when it came to America, with his revival movement, what was most broken in society was not necessarily alcoholism. You know, we can all debate for hours about what is most broken in American society, and alcoholism is a problem here.
Sure.
And people die needlessly of it every year. But when your pietism does not fully engage what is most broken in your society, it becomes almost a list of rules of things not to do. And when you just have a list of things not to do, then maybe the heart is not so engaged as it was when you were confronting your society's most broken problems. And so because of that...
You're just the police.
Yeah. So because of that, what happens is it becomes kind of lukewarm, and those churches didn't really... there are some that are still big today, but, you know, eventually they start to wane.
So what was his...
He was Lutheran.
Lutheran, okay.
So Martin's not our only guy. Martin's not our only guy. Lars Levi Lestadius, Swedish Lutheran, half Laplander, starts this great revival, makes it all the way to America. They engage the heart. They confront what's most broken in society. And so basically they start being able to send missionaries because their own society was so changed. Alcoholism was confronted. Alcoholism rates completely decreased. Poverty decreased along with it. The only people that got poor off of his revival were alcohol traders. Everybody else did much, much better. All the reindeer farmers, everything else.
So can you tell, or is his influence ingrained into all of the Lutheran churches, or is there a particular type of Lutheran church?
It was really only the Lestadian Lutheran. And the sad part of this is that although he lived from 1800 to 1861, can we get the picture of the old guys, please, Patrick? So even though he was around from 1800 to 1861, he was part of this really important missionary movement. He was a person of the culture in which he was ministering. He was actually local. I mean, he was raised up from within their community. Mostly,
he would start with a certain amount of trust.
Right, and so, you know, he had a brother that was not Laplander who helped him acquire his education, or he may not have been able to get it. But you know, you have this guy that's half Laplander, so let's send him to work with the people in Lapland as a missionary. So we had the old guys there, and that was 1910. That was the first.
So he's not in there.
No, it was after he was gone. But what I notice about this picture is, even though we had this really great example of what happens when we send someone who is of the culture as missionary, this is the World Missionary Conference, 1910. It was like the first ecumenical gathering in the history of the church. And everybody looks to me like they're a white guy. There are some ladies in the balcony.
Yeah.
Sadly, they're just in the balcony. Okay, so it didn't catch on. I mean, if you ask a regular Lutheran walking down the street, who's Lars Lestadius, unless they're from a Lestadian church, they're not going to know. So this was not something that endured or lasted.
How do you know if you're in the Lestadian church?
You might know in your history. You might be a Swedish Lutheran church.
So there's no outward visible thing.
No. So you might be in a Swedish Lutheran church that has a real focus on pietism, And so then you're likely that might be a church that was started during the Laestadian movement.
And that would probably be a reflection of the community and your history.
Absolutely.
Just like here is Irish, Scottish, and
absolutely.
Welsh and
It's more to do with immigrant
The
communities that
settlers.
moved.
Right.
Yeah. So, and Lutheranism in America is 100% almost an immigrant community originally, because they come from all the countries in Europe and they settled where they settled. But what we have is we didn't really learn from Lars Laestadius. And that's part of the problem now. It's the similar thing where we have this top-down model of ministry. We send our goods all over the world. We're paying for the fuel with American companies to send it there. And we're not developing as much infrastructure as we could. Now, we have Lutheran social services in America, and we have Lutheran World Relief all over the place. So as Lutherans, we have a little more focus on this and really do a better job, a good job anyway, of developing infrastructure and thinking about tomorrow. What does tomorrow look like? And not only fostering a relationship of dependence.
Do the churches get together and organize, okay, you Lutherans are going to do this part, and say like the Catholics or the Baptists, they're going to handle this other part?
They might at like a World Council of Churches level, but I'm too low on the list to know
I
about
wasn't
that.
sure if there was a certain mission that you guys did.
Well, they do work ecumenically and interdenominationally in other countries. I mean, I know that. But it just seems like a lot of times the country that benefits most from our missionary outreach is the country from which it starts. I realize we're providing aid and we're sending people over, but the jobs that we create are jobs for us. We're sending our folks over. The goods that we buy are our goods. We send our goods over.
And when we stop going,
then
it
there's
stops.
nothing. Yeah. And that's the sad thing. When churches shrink, as a lot of mainline churches are right now, where do people cut first? Youth and missions. Well, that's really problematic because, you cut youth programs, you don't have a church of the future.
Right.
You cut missions, you're no longer doing what Jesus told you to do, and how are you going to last that way?
Right.
So those are kind of some of the issues. And so this is what we have to worry about going forward. And I have one organization that my church works with, if we can get their picture up really quickly. The Haitian Timoun Foundation, they work with us in Haiti, and what they do is they have partners on the ground in Haiti. Everyone in country in Haiti that works there for Haitian Timoun Foundation is Haitian. We have an executive director in the States that runs things on our end, but everyone in country is actually Haitian, so they're providing Haitian jobs. What kind of things do they do? They eliminate ultra poverty in the Central Plateau region, the poorest region of Haiti, in cooperation with Foncosé, which is a banking organization. They provide.
How do they eliminate poverty?
So what happens? It's a program called
They're just not out there handing out money.
Chemin la vie mieux, and so it means pathway to a better life.
Okay.
And so what they do is they invest in people in the community, and it's women because that's who has least access to jobs. And so what they do then is they make sure that they kind of subsidize them for a little while until their businesses get underway. And then once they graduate, they've either established themselves in things like raising goats or cattle or pigs, or they have markets, or they cook different kind of whatever their skills are.
So would that be like our
And then
business incubators we have here?
Basically, it's like that. And so what happens then is they are able to raise out of ultra poverty, and they also share with everyone in their community and help them come out as well. And so it's not just them and their family, they really are community minded, and so it helps raise the whole community out of poverty when someone are successful with raising goats or something like that, because they provide
Has
for
this been
their
going
families.
on for many years, like before the hurricane and all that?
Yes, before the hurricane.
Okay.
After the hurricane, they did a lot with helping defeat the cholera outbreak by sending clean water filters that were, if you maintain them, and we taught them how to maintain those filters, the people there. When they're taught how to maintain those filters, they have clean water for like pretty much ever. So they have those kind of programs. There's also no free education in Haiti, and they provide for education for children. Average annual income actually is lower than the cost it takes to send a child to school. And so what we care about at my church, because it's a rural Appalachian congregation, is one thing that we care about, because so many of our young folks have trouble going to college, is education. And so whereas we have first-time college graduates or college students like you have here at Rio a lot, in Haiti they have first-time elementary school students. And so sometimes you got to bear with them because they might fail 1 year or so, but they don't have anybody to help them with their homework. And maybe the only place they get to eat is at school. And so, and they have to work in fields and don't have time for homework because, it may not be of value among parents sometimes. But
they're just trying to get by.
And that's how we try to change life in Haiti, provide for education, try to eliminate ultra poverty, clean water, jobs. And so that's a way that it looks in the 21st century of how to do missionary work, but it also raises up leaders in the indigenous peoples and indigenous communities to be the ones in charge. That way they're the ones with the jobs, and you're getting goods in that country, which also bolsters the economy, as opposed to just sending all our own goods somewhere else.
What's the definition of ultra poverty?
So first-hand experience for me was...
You've been on one of these missions?
We go on a trip to meet our partners,
okay.
Right? And so I went to meet our partners in Haiti, and in the Central Plateau, we were visiting a family that was about to go on the program for breakfast, and they were about to start being charcoal merchants, because all cooking is done with charcoal there. And the one child who was not theirs was their neighbor, and he didn't have any clothes, and he came over for breakfast because he didn't have any available to him at his house. And the parents did not eat, and they only got one meal a day anyway, and they did not eat so that they could make sure that their neighbor's child also got breakfast.
Oh, wow.
So from firsthand account, that's my knowledge of ultra poverty in the Central Plateau. It's not just no plumbing and things that we might like to think about. It's you only get to eat one meal a day, and you don't even eat that because you give it to your kids.
Right.
Yeah, and the neighbor's kids.
Right. Are they small communities?
Yeah, they're in villages in the Central Plateau. The big town there is Mirbelet, and we go there too. But we're going out in the community with the mission. HTF, Haitian T-Moon Foundation, does a good job, and there are lots of other things that do a good job. Lutheran World Relief. But as going forward, I think when the church thinks about how we do mission, we really need to think about what kind of infrastructure are we providing for tomorrow.
If we
not
disappeared,
just meeting hunger today.
Right. If we disappeared, that help does not disappear.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or even better, we may not need to be there.
Sure. Right. That's the whole thing, trying to get people
go somewhere else that needs more help. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for letting us know about the mission work, and thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.